Hi all, in this video I'm going to go over the final essay assignment, talk about what some of my expectations are, and I'll go over an example essay that's for another class but will give you an idea of the sort of paper that I'm looking for. So hopefully this is helpful. So you'll find the final essay assignment in the week 3 module. So for this paper, I'm requiring 7 to 8 pages in MLA format. If you're not familiar with MLA format, you can just Google that, and you can even find sample, download the format, Word document with the format. For this paper will be due in the last week of the class. So your instructions are identify and explain a specific groundbreaking technology, explicating the social significance of the technology throughout your paper and defending whether it is a positive or negative contribution to humanity at large. I'll talk about possible topic or suggested topics below, but let me talk about some of the requirements. You must have at least 8 scholarly sources, so books and articles combined. It may have additional sources as needed, but must have at least 8 scholarly ones. So scholarly sources will be academic journal articles or books written by scholars in the relevant fields. So you can have things like websites, but you need, those will not count towards your academic sources. You can find some academic sources in the Bakersfield College Library, on the Bakersfield College Library website. You can do the academic one-file search and use that to find academic sources. So it must have a thesis and be argumentative, meaning that it should provide a defense for a stance that you're taking. So this is not merely informative. You're going to be arguing for a position. It must be analytical and academic in tone. So note, even though it's argumentative, I don't mean go after in like an ad hominem against the person sort of way, the opposition. You need to be academic and professional in tone. So, but you're also taking a clear stance and arguing for it. So no book reports. You're taking a stance and arguing for it. You must. So the thesis is when your thesis statement should appear maybe at the end of your introduction, at the end of your first paragraph. And in your thesis statement, you should say, I am arguing for X, where X is whatever claim you're going to be supporting. Don't be afraid to use the word I in this argumentative paper. It lets the reader know what you're doing above and beyond what your source material might be doing. So you're taking a stance here. You must consider and disarm objections to your thesis. I'll show you an example of how you can do that in the example paper. It must include significant discussion of ideas presented in one of the course readings. So either in Living with Robots or in the ethics textbook that we're using. Aim for at least a page of your paper should deal with the ideas or arguments presented in our in-class books. Must be typed, double-spaced, clearly organized, and properly punctuated. You'll be turning it in as a Word document you'll be turning it in online right here as a Word document. So let me know how I can help you, assist you. I'm here for you. There are some suggested topics below. So I put in bold the suggested topic. And I put some relevant course readings from our text, and I also give you an article, a really brief article to get you started thinking about these topics. So the first one is organ on a chip. So with this technology, instead of doing like animal testing to test like the safety of chemicals. There has been some technology in the works that you might make a microchip so advanced that it could have all the information necessary to run tests on the organ, like on a virtual organ. So our reading from Gibson chapter 2 might be interesting there, especially the utilitarian stuff, the moral status of non-human animals, all that stuff would be interesting there, and I have an article for you. So self-driving cars and trolley problems. So an interesting issue with self-driving cars is determining what they'll do in situations where they might have to avoid accidents and what courses of action they might take to avoid accidents. So if they're going to run over 5 school children, should they instead veer off course, resulting in the destruction of the vehicle and the death of the driver? Or should they continue, for example? There are a whole bunch of relevant readings from the ethics text. There's an article here to get you, a couple articles here to get you started. Racist artificial intelligence. So they apparently, a company created an artificial intelligence, allowed it to go on chat boards and discuss things with people, and it turned out to be that the chat boards made the AI racist. You can check that out and report back to us about it. Facial recognition software is an interesting technology, whether it violates people's privacy if they're not consenting to have it done to them. There are some issues with racism here, that facial recognition software might not be, well, in many cases is not as good at distinguishing between faces of certain races. So that's also an issue that you could investigate. Finally, increased automation and wealth inequality. So this was a big issue in the Democratic presidential primary with Andrew Yang, talking a lot about it and what we should do in the face of this potential problem. With increased automation, there'll be less need for laborers to do work. How should we deal with that as a society? The way we like to deal with things in this country is just let the rich keep getting richer, and but is that an adequate response, or do we need to take bigger measures? I have an article here that gets in, or a quote from Stephen Hawking, actually, which is can get you started on this, and there's some chapter recommendations, and that would also be an interesting big picture topic. All right, so let's look at and you can pick something else. If you know of a technology that has moral implications and some of the reading from the course would be relevant to discussing it, then by all means, write on that and follow the guidelines. All right, so let's look at an example essay which will demonstrate the things you can do, the features of argumentative essays that you should include. Now, this was written for another class, so it's not on a specific technology, but the features that your paper, there are many features that your paper should have that it has. So first, the title. Talk about giving till it hurts. Your paper should have a title. What should we do about the world hunger problem? Some, such as Robert Nozick, might say that since I have a right to private property, provided I have not acquired it through force or fraud, I'm entitled to my wealth and need not give anything to starving nations. Others, like Peter Singer, think that we owe it to these nations to help them out, to maximize the overall happiness in the world as long as we do not sacrifice something of comparable moral significance. In this paper, I will explain and examine Peter Singer's argument, and I will attempt to show that Singer's argument is a plausible one by replying to 2 objections against his view. So note all the things that the author accomplishes in this Introduction. First of all, they jump right into the issue. Why should we care about this issue? World hunger, there's a big problem surrounding it, right? They don't start off by saying anything like, since the beginning of time, people have wondered about hunger. It's not true. People haven't been around since the beginning of time. And also, it's uninteresting. Get us right into the issue. Then the author sets up a couple of opposing views on the issue. That's a nice thing to do. Note also that even though the author doesn't directly quote either of the authors, the author paraphrases them, they still include a reference, a citation, and that's really important. Even if you're just paraphrasing, you need to include a citation. And then finally, the author offers two things at the end of the introduction. Their thesis, they're going to be showing that Singer's argument is a good one, and then also a plan. How are they going to do? How's the author going to do that? By replying to two objections against his view. So what they're trying to prove, how they're going to prove it. That's the most important thing in an introduction to an argumentative paper. All right, so after that, the author lays out the details of the target argument that they're going to be talking about, the premises that are in the target argument, the any key terms that need to be defined. The paper you're writing is slightly different in that you won't be narrowly addressing one specific argument. You're talking about a technology and sort of presenting arguments on both sides, but ultimately siding with one. So yours will be slightly different, but you'll need to define key terms. You'll need to explain arguments on both sides of the technology. Let's get down to the objections and responses, because that's what you will definitely have to have. So here, everyone obviously does not agree with Singer's view. Singer's opponents might object that we affluent people have a right to our property, and that donating to world hunger is a gift, not an obligation. Ayn Rand has said no man can have a right to impose an unchosen obligation or unrewarded duty on another. There can be no such thing as the right to enslave. This view is also echoed by Robert Nozick. So, these poor nations would be in effect enslaving us to work for them and providing them with food. Singer could so note, the objection is given in a full paragraph, really allowing it to, as they say, have its day in court, right? Don't be afraid to allow the objection to breathe. Do make sure that you're indicating that it's an objection, not your view. It's an objection to your view that you're going to be dealing with and ultimately rejecting, right? So in the next paragraph, the person addresses the objection. The author addresses the objection. Singer could reply to this objection, however, by arguing that property rights are not more important or basic than the right to life. If you can save someone with $1 or 1 minute of your time, then you owe that money or time to that person. If you were starving and knew that someone made a decision not to help you after deciding instead to go to a movie that they really didn't want or need to see while you starved to death, how would that make you feel? So property rights, at least when compared to the right to life, should be overridden. Also, to respond to Ayn Rand, Singer might reply by arguing that a person with a right to life in fact imposes an unchosen obligation on others' behalf, whether they like it or not. If this is correct, then a person can have a right to impose an unrewarded duty upon another. So the author raises an objection with the view that they'll be defending, really fleshes out that objection, but then shows that it ultimately doesn't work in another paragraph. And this you should use as a model for the objections and response section of your paper. The author then raises another objection, another response, and then they conclude. And there are many things that you can take away from this conclusion. So in conclusion, I've examined Singer's argument in favor of donating to world hunger and tried to show that he makes a good argument for his position. In order to do that, I considered two objections against his view. and arguably gave some plausible responses on his behalf. So what has the author done here so far? If in the introduction you say what you're going to do, in the body of the paper you do what you say you're going to do, in the conclusion you say what you did. This is called a closed writing style, so no surprises throughout. You say you lay out what you're going to do briefly in the beginning, you do it, then you sort of bookend it, you say what you did at the end. Though Singer's position demands a lot from affluent nations, we cannot deny our moral responsibility to help out people whose lives depend on receiving aid. World hunger is an important issue, and much more work is needed in order to discover what the best way of relieving it is. For example, I have not shown that Locke's view is definitely incorrect, though I've tried to answer an objection that he may have made. Whether or not Locke is correct is another issue for another day. So, a nice thing that the author does here at the end of the paper is point out what future research could be done on this topic. I would urge you in this paper and with other papers you might write to imagine that you're part of a scholarly community that is interested in this particular issue, and that the community will find your work interesting, and that at the end of the paper you want to direct them with the next step in your research. You definitely won't have the final word on the technology you're discussing in a 7 or 8 page paper. You're just going to be, as much as you can, scratching as deep into the surface of the issue as deeply as you can, but you won't cover all the issues with it. So it's a nice thing to do to show that you understand where your project fits into a larger project, right? So that's a great thing to do at the end of the paper. All right, so I'm going to post this at the end of this paper. It has some examples of why it's a good paper, so you can read those if you'd like. We've gone over many of them. All right, so hopefully this is helpful for you, for your project. If you have any questions about the paper in general or your particular project, send me an email and we can handle it via email, or we can set up an appointment to talk further. All right, good luck. I look forward to seeing what you come up with.